Hello, Brubs. We're back with Young Adolf, a 1978 novel by the English author Beryl Bainbridge. And we are in the home stretch of this book, thankfully, and it's almost over. Although the aspect of Bridget Hitler is still looming large. Let's turn on the light, finish this book off. Chapter 29. As it turned out, there wasn't a great deal of fetching to be done. Twice M. DuPont canceled his afternoon paper. He was out most days or else busy upstairs. Several times Adolf loitered about the corridors of the first floor in the hope that M. DuPont would come upon him and remember some urgent errand. He was seen by a page boy who warned him to be especially careful. Extra security men had been hired to patrol the building. Something was up. The disguises they got themselves into would take your breath away. He's one, hissed the boy, pointing at a man in a leather coat who, a fraction before Adolf looked in that direction, had disappeared behind the life-size statue of a marble god. Though he had no doubt the boy was half-witted, Adolf could not help regarding with suspicion the stuffed bear that stood outside the entrance to the sportsman's bar. If he had been employed night and day by the hotel, he would have been perfectly happy, for there he wore his smart gray uniform and his undervest of laundered cotton with the monogram on the shoulder. But his work ended at 5:30. In the storeroom, when he changed into his jacket and trousers, he felt he became a leper. Walking home through the crowded streets, he imagined that the passers-by shrank from contact with him. He was forever sniffing his armpits or examining the seams of his coat. Eloise complained that it was worse than living with a monkey. It began to affect Adolph's work. Once spoken to in a hectoring manner by a stout Jewish gentleman who had ordered a glass of Russian tea and a dish of strawberries and cream, he was overcome by rage. The kitchen had dispatched him with the glass of tea and a jug of cream, but omitted the strawberries. Take the tray away, ordered the gentleman. I wish the items to arrive simultaneously, not in dribs and drabs. Purple in the face with suppressed passion, Adolf picked up the tray and contrived to tip the contents of the cream jug into the gentleman's lap. And that's just for starters, he thought. Mollified, he hastened to fetch a sponge and a basin of water. Finally, unable to bear his condition any longer, Adolf turned to Meyer for help. Perhaps he would be loaned the dark blue jacket with the gold buttons. Since the fiasco of the Revolution, he had seen very little of him. He had expected to find him reduced and out of sorts, and was surprised to see him seated cheerfully at the table in the front room, playing checkers with the doctor. Ah, the working man personified, cried Cephalus at the sight of him. I will come back another time, said Adolf, and he went out, slamming the door violently behind him, hoping to bury the disgusting doctor under an avalanche of plaster. The very next morning, having received his newspaper in the mauve breakfast room, M. DuPont said, I have observed you going out by the front entrance and returning by the side entrance. Why is that, do you suppose? Merely a rule, explained Adolf. I have never questioned the logic. Thankfully, he pocketed a 3-penny bit. By the way, said M. DuPont, I would like you to run a little errand for me this afternoon. Meet me in the foyer at 1 o'clock sharp. If it's all the same to you, Adolf said carefully, it would be better if you yourself brought the parcel downstairs. We aren't allowed into the rooms. How inconvenient, sighed M. DuPont. Perhaps I should ask someone else. Adolf persuaded him that there was no need. If things went wrong, he told himself, he had both Meyer and Eloise to speak for him. Meyer was highly thought of in the supper rooms. At 1 o'clock, when trembling, he climbed the stairs to the first floor, he found the corridors completely deserted. Either the page boy had been exaggerating, or else house detectives were all drinking behind the closed doors of the linen room. Arriving safely in the foyer with the brown paper parcel under his arm, he was stopped by a man in a leather coat who said something incomprehensible to him. At that moment, the head porter stepped forward and, handing Adolf a prescription, told him to go immediately to the chemist's in Lord Street. The man in the leather jacket looked at the prescription, then at the head porter, and dismissed Adolf with a wave of his hand. It was raining outside. M. Dupont had impressed upon Adolf that it was vital to deliver the parcel to Mr. Brackenbury by 1:45 at the latest. Adolf waited 20 minutes at the chemist for a bottle of cough mixture. When he returned to the hotel, he positioned himself in the center of the cab rank and whistled frantically for the commissioner. I've said it every time, commissar. Commissioner to come down the steps. The commissioner told him forcefully to go around to the side door and do his own delivering. Adolf was forced to part with his threepenny bit. He ran as fast as he could through the streets, but he was hampered by the raised umbrellas in every hand. He told himself it was just a manner of speech, M. Dupont's mania for punctuality. Turning into Pitt Street, he was alarmed to see a policeman hovering on the pavement in the vicinity of the Chinese provision store. He stopped and pretended to be looking into the window of an ironmonger's. A second policeman came out of the store holding fast to the arm of a man who, by the loudness of his motoring coat, was instantly recognizable as Mr. Brackenbury. By now, both Adolf and his paper parcel were saturated by the rain. He walked thoughtfully back to the hotel, pondering on how he would extricate himself from this dilemma in a dignified manner. It was obvious that he had been a fool. He no longer cared if he spent the rest of his days in his old coat and trousers, but for chance and the crowded chemists, he would now be locked in a cell at the Bridewell. The parcel in his arms was already sodden, and simply by pressing one finger to a portion of the wrapping, he was able to split the paper. Pardon. He entered the hotel, made his way to the storeroom where he kept his outdoor clothes, and finding the place empty, examined the contents of the package. He wasn't surprised to uncover a quantity of silver spoons, snuff boxes, and various small articles of jewelry. Retying the parcel as best he could, he wrapped it in his outdoor coat and bundled it into a shoe cupboard. Then he went in search of M. Dupont. He wouldn't reproach that gentleman or even indicate that he knew what the parcel contained. He would merely tell him where it was hidden and how in future, though it was regrettable, he would have to fetch his own newspaper, morning and afternoon editions. Leaning forward through the steam of the Turkish bath, he would drop the key to M. Dupont's suite into the damp folds of his belly. M. Dupont was neither in the Turkish bath nor in the foyer. At 4 o'clock, he failed to make an appearance in the lounge. Nobody had seen him since luncheon. On inquiring finally at the desk, Adolf was told that M. Dupont had paid his bill at 1:30 and left in a cab for New York via Pier 47. I will drink a glass of water, thought Adolf, and think of something. I won't give way to panic. There was only one sensible solution. All others could, in the end, point to his being an accessory. To return the parcel to the suite and leave the key in the lock. But how to get the parcel upstairs? After some thought, Adolf purloined a tray from the kitchens and a white cloth. Returning to the storeroom, he washed his hands and his perspiring face, and carefully combed that lock of hair at a slant over his brow. Balancing on the palm of his hand what he hoped appeared to be a tray of afternoon tea, he crossed the lounge. At this hour, every sofa, every chair was occupied. On the dais, a string quartet was playing a medley of waltzes by Strauss. Adolf could see himself reflected in the mirrors, dapper in his gray uniform, the edge of his tray glittering under the chandeliers as he threaded his way between the table. The modernity and brilliance of the scene dazzled him. The air was filled with the buzz of voices, the tinkle of cups, the lilting strains of the violin. It seemed to him that the vast lounge had never been more beautiful. It was the best job he had ever had, even if it was his first. Goddamn M. DuPont to hell for this paradise lost. Tears in his eyes, he climbed the stairs to the first floor. Again, he was lucky. There wasn't a soul in the corridors. He had put his tray down momentarily on the green carpet and was fitting his key in the lock when a hand touched him on the shoulder. Turning, he looked full into the face of the bearded man who, that night in the square, when he had fallen over the Christmas tree, had engineered his escape from the prostitute. Son, said the bearded man, and would have said more, only now Adolf, recovering from that second of paralysis, was running full tilt along the corridor, having abandoned himself completely to some earlier ancestral condition when chased by brontosauruses or demons and flooded with adrenaline. Man had fled for the safety of the cave. Skidding around the curve of the staircase, he leapt into the foyer and hurled himself into the revolving doors. Emerging into the night air, he took the wall of the cab rank in his stride and landed on his feet in the street below. He felt immediately powerful as he sprinted along Lime Street and turned left towards the market. Minus his horse, he was old Shatterhand himself, cunning as a coyote and determined to shake off his pursuers. Had there been a convenient rock in the middle of the city street, he would have climbed to the top of it and, pulling down the tram cables as though they were cobwebs, shouted to the skies that he was great, he was glorious. Then suddenly it was over. He had burnt himself out, utterly spent. He dribbled to a standstill. He had to cling to a lamppost in case he fell down on the pavement. I'm wearing the hotel uniform, he thought. I shall be charged with theft as well as being an accessory. He had no idea how long he stood there, shuddering with fatigue, his teeth chattering in his head. He flapped back and forth like a rag as the pedestrians pushed past him. He was in a narrow street, his back to the lighted windows of a department store. Across the road was a warehouse of some kind with a small door at street level and a loading bay 2 stories high. Further down he could see a section of a cobbled square in which stood a circular grill open to the sky. Peering over the top of the ornamental grill, the lamplight clearly illuminating the planes of his face, was the man with the beard. Adolf crossed the road and, like an animal nosing for cover, blundered through the door of the warehouse. Chapter 30. He was outside the grand salon of the Pondivedrian embassy in Paris. Count Danilo was singing, I'm off to Chez Maxime to join the swirling stream for one brief hour enchanting. Help me, cried Adolf, and he fell into the arms of a young man who stood in the passageway beside a flight of stone steps. When people ask what bliss is, I simply tell them, this is. Steady on, urged the young man, and he guided Adolf into a little cubbyhole set in the wall and assisted him onto a high stool. Where am I? Whispered Adolf. Is it possible I'm dead? You're a queer color, the young man said, answering him in German, though in a tone of voice reminiscent of Mrs. Prentice, but you're not yet a corpse. Several young women in low-cut dresses, cheeks heavily rouged and eyelashes dripping with lamp blacking, ran down the stairs. Look at this, called the young man. Is he drunk or ill? The ladies took no notice. Smoothing their dresses and patting their curls into place, they swept through the pass door onto the stage. You'll have to go, the young man said. It's more than my job's worth. There are only artists or scene shifters allowed through here, and you're neither of those. If I'm sent into the street, protested Adolf, his voice stronger now, I shall be instantly taken into custody. There's a man waiting to pounce on me and drag me to the police station. It's none of my concern, muttered the young man, looking anxiously up and down the passageway. You shouldn't have misbehaved. I didn't misbehave, shouted Adolf. I swear it. It is too exhausting to go into full details, concerning as they do a Chinese provision store and a matter of second-hand clothes and a French gentleman who duped me, but I'm telling the truth. I have committed no crime. I behaved foolishly, but only to save myself. He paused fractionally. I didn't want to go under. Ah, murmured the young man. Adolf waited. He gripped the edges of the stool as though he were in danger of drowning. He would only use Meyer's name as a last desperate measure. It was possible the young man hated his father. Chapter 31. At first, Adolf strenuously resisted the suggestion, but eventually he realized he had no choice. As the young man so rightly stated, the theater was a utility building. Every cupboard, every inch of space had a purpose. Though it was against the rules, when the musicians were in the orchestra pit, their sweethearts waited in the band room beneath the stage. Nor could Adolf be hidden in the green room, the prop room, the manager's office, or the wardrobe. It was absurd to think he could pass unnoticed in the dressing rooms. If he did manage to squeeze himself behind the backdrop, he would have to pray that the flyman wasn't drunk. He could receive a fatal blow on the head from a carelessly dropped sandbag. Then there was the fireman who shone his torch into every corner of the building every half hour or so. And you'd be hiding for two of us, concluded the young man. Not just for yourself. If you were rumbled, it would be disastrous. I'd be out on my ear. I'm directly responsible for anyone who gets past that door. All right, said Adolf testily. I take your point. He was annoyed that he had been unable to put some use the valuable lesson he felt he had learned the night of the abortive rebellion in Argyle Street. Though the young man was a minority of one, Adolf had tried to exert his authority and failed. The young man simply talked him into the ground. We have very little time, worried the young man. The curtain will be down at any moment. Rubbish, said Adolf. They haven't yet finished the pavilion duet. He had seen The Merry Widow 7 times. It was his favorite operetta. Let me put something there. At first, Adolf strenuously resisted the suggestion. Oh, wait. I started reading the same thing. He had seen The Merry Widow 7 times. It was his favorite operetta. The change had to be accomplished within the constricted space of the cubbyhole in the wall. There was nowhere else that was safe. Oh, my God, protested Adolf when he saw the garments that were handed to him. Surely you can find something less conspicuous. It's the safest costume in the world, the young man assured him, for a man in your position. He should know, thought Adolf. Resigned, he stepped into the voluminous skirt and struggled to fasten the innumerable hooks and eyes of a blue voile blouse. Hurry, the young man urged. They are coming to the end of the finale. Thanking his stars that he hadn't been given a bonnet, Adolf draped a gray shawl over his head and stepped down into the passage. Out, said the young man, and opening the street door, he pushed Adolf into the night. He walked so rapidly and with head so inclined to the ground that he couldn't tell if people regarded him suspiciously or not. He was no longer concerned about being arrested. He had done his best. There was nothing further he could do. Indeed, his anxieties were now centered on how he should proceed if he reached Stanhope Street safely. He could no longer stay in England. He was a marked man. He had 3 weeks' wages saved and 4 shillings and 3 pence in tips. He didn't think it would be sufficient to buy him a ticket for the steamer and the train, and he would need other clothes. He could hardly go to Lime Street Station wearing the distinctive gray uniform of the Adelphi Hotel. He had meant when he arrived at the house to creep up the stairs and discard his women's clothing in the top rooms. Let Meyer and Michael Murphy and the youth with crinkly hair make what they liked of it. But no sooner had he entered the dark lobby than the door of Meyer's room opened. Adolf quickly turned his back to the light and stood there, hoping whoever it was wouldn't see him. He imagined it was Mary O'Leary attending to the coals. He was astonished to feel two arms encircling his waist. He struggled. The shawl slipped completely over his face. A name was breathed against his chest. His buttocks supported in two large hands. He was jiggled up and down. Outraged, he threw a wild punch and had the satisfaction of feeling bone under his fist. He was released at once. Snatching off his shawl, he came face to face with Meyer. A second figure stepped into the hall. It was the man with the beard. Chapter 32. It wasn't a commonplace misunderstanding by any means, but by now Adolf was so inured to peculiar happenings that he accepted it almost as such. Meyer acted as interpreter. The man with the beard admitted he'd been following him for weeks. He hadn't made himself known for two reasons. He wanted to be sure Adolf was who he was, or rather who he wasn't, and he didn't wish to be seen by Mary O'Leary. If he was proved wrong in his surmise, he would only distress her. He had a grand little common-law wife in Blackpool. He had hoped that Adolf was his son. After all, he had been husband to Mary O'Leary for one night. He was sorry to have caused Adolf so much inconvenience and regretful they weren't flesh of one flesh. This last sentiment didn't sound totally sincere. He avoided looking at Adolf's blouse and skirt. So he wasn't on the boat, said Adolf. He wasn't, said Meyer, nor the train. He's no longer a traveling man, replied Meyer. It's the photograph that did it, said Adolf, pointing to the faded print image on the mantelpiece. It's him. Isn't it, when young? Meyer nodded. Having seen it day after day, said Adolf, I believed I knew him. Some people are recognizable at all times, Meyer said, attempting a smile, no matter how many years later or however disguised. The skin beneath his left eye was distinctly bruised. You didn't fool me for a moment. Where did you find such clothes? Here and there, said Adolf. He resolved to grow a mustache. Never again would he be mistaken for a woman. Suddenly, he wanted to go home more than anything in the world, even though there was no such place. Meyer and Alois between them could pay for his ticket. He would have no compunction in asking them. Alois would be glad to see the back of him, and how could Meyer refuse, having whispered Bridget's name in the hall? Never in all my life, thought Adolf, under torture or interrogation, will I mention that I have been to this accursed city, visited this lunatic island. Chapter 33. The following day, when told of these latest developments, Alois, though indignant at having yet again to fork out on Adolf's behalf, agreed that there was no help for it. Obviously, if his half-brother returned to the hotel, inquiries would be made. The page boy might remember seeing him in the corridors. The head porter and the man in the leather jacket would remember the parcel under his arm. Wrapped in a blanket, Adolf waited while Alois smuggled the gray uniform into the hotel and retrieved his old clothes from the shoe cupboard. You've not exactly improved your station in life, said Alois, handing over the shabby jacket and trousers. Circumstances, replied Adolf, have been against me. South America being out of the question, Alois said he would book a ticket to Linz. Meyer suggested that Munich might be better. He had some contacts in the city that could prove useful to Adolf, certain political organizations, certain persons of note and influence. Certain trouble, thought Adolf, but he kept his thoughts to himself. 4 days later, he left from Lime Street Station. He kissed darling Pat on the cheek and shook hands with Alois and Meyer. Despite Meyer's protests, he had refused to take the black overcoat with him. In his hand, he clutched the brown handkerchief Bridget had made him for Christmas. Say Tara to Uncle Adolf, cried Bridget, holding up the baby's hand. The train began to move. The party on the platform waved and smiled exaggeratedly. Leaning out of the window, Adolf shouted something ending with the word In Zukunft werde ich es der Zurücker statten. He was looking beyond Eloise at the fiddle player. Eloise swore. What's wrong? Asked Bridget. He only said you'd get what he owed you. It has a double meaning, Eloise told her angrily. It was a threat. He'd meant I'd get what was coming to me. It's of no consequence, said Meyer, taking Bridget's arm and turning her towards the barrier. Such a strong-willed young man. It is a pity he will never amount to anything. And that's the end of this book. And fittingly, there's 0 people in the chat to commemorate the end of this worthless book, although it did lead me to the memoirs of Bridget Hitler, which I will track down somehow, even though it seems to be a costly price to pay for it, $40 to $50 range. We shall see, bravs. Bravs, come on.